Thank you, Veronica.
I'm not Louis XIV.
Yes, you are.
I'm not even Louis. Okay. Louis XIV. Louis XIV was born rather... Whoa. Problems? Right into it? Like this. I don't do this often. Louis XIV was born rather suddenly in 1638. His parents, Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, were married for 22 years without having a baby. Louis XIII was known to stay away from her for as long as 19 years at a stretch. He didn't seem very interested. Because of the long delay, the infant was called Louis Dieudonné, or Louis the God-Given. He was later known as Louis le Roi Soleil, or Louis the Show-Off. Extremely dull as a child, he gradually developed this characteristic into a system of governance. Some scholars explain Louis' dullness by his royal position, kings being more or less out of touch, but this would hardly account for the symptoms. Others say he was deliberately kept in a state of ignorance by his teachers when he was a boy, but no professors, however, could have done so perfect a job unless the student showed a natural aptitude of no small order. They would have slipped up somewhere. One could easily write an entire book about celebrated men who were stupid in youth and remained so throughout life, but we can't stop for that now. Louis XIV was definitely the Louis. He's hard to write about because he lived so long and was always up to something. Among his hobbies were women, invading the Low Countries, annexing Alsace-Lorraine, surrendering Alsace-Lorraine, and revoking the Edict of Nantes. Everyone wanted Alsace and Lorraine because they were full of Strasbourg geese. Throughout his reign, Louis XIV worked 8 hours a day. Other kings let their ministers make their mistakes for them, but Louis insisted on making all of the important mistakes personally. He was the original quick decision man. He did it almost automatically after a while, but there were so many little details to screw up that he had to get some experts to help him. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, an authority on industry and agriculture, worked 16 hours a day and therefore did twice as much damage to the country. He abolished an unpopular tax on salt and put taxes on everything else. Afterwards, the salt tax came back anyway. Colbert did not believe in supply and demand, so he made them illegal. He also ordered every family to have 10 children so they could grow up and get shot in the Low Countries. As a result, the French had so many children that nowadays they hardly have any. The long series of wars carried on by Louis XIV also helped ruin the country. This was called La Gloire. Louis loved La Gloire even more than l'amour. Louis was 10 years old when the 30 Years' War ended, and he was never able to achieve one of equal length or duration, no matter how hard he tried. Starting with an invasion of Flanders, he soon worked up to an extensive war against the Dutch, in which he won the title of Louis le Grand, or Louis the Chump, for failing to defeat William of Orange. His war with the Grand Alliance lasted 10 years, then all the different sides gave back everything they'd won, and things were about the same, except everyone was 10 years older and all the dead people stayed that way. As you may or may not be aware, Louis XIV built Versailles, a large, drafty palace full of Louis XIV furniture and Madame de Montespan. As Madame de Montespan got fatter and fatter, he eventually built her a palace of her own where she could have more elbow room. Versailles contained hundreds of small apartments, and some of the things that happened to them didn't get into the books. When the weather was warm enough, we do know there were amusing little parties in the garden, especially in certain parts called the King's Shrubbery and the Queen's Shrubbery. Louis XIV also invented etiquette. He was awakened every morning at 8 a.m. by the valet de chambre, who slept in a corner of the room fully dressed. I've been unable to find who awakens the valet de chambre. Then the best people were let in to watch the king dress, and so forth throughout the day. Indeed, there's so much etiquette at Versailles that it would have been impossible to conduct any serious business if there'd been any. To give him his due, Louis XIV brought the art of dressing and undressing in public to a perfection it's never reached before or since. Just why this sort of thing comes under the heading of etiquette is beyond the scope of this piece. However, those of you who feel that the social life of today is particularly demanding should at least consider that you don't have to get up at 7:30 a.m. to watch Louis XIV put on his pants. At the age of 21, he married Marie-Thérèse, a princess of Spain. She'd been thrown in with a piece of the Pyrenees and looked it. She was stocky, heavy-jowled, and had a poor complexion and black teeth. You can't have everything. She also had Habsburg lip and cried all the time. Soon after this, Louis was very close to Henrietta of England, who was the wife of Duke d'Orléans, his brother, but soon switched to Louis de Vallière, another tearful type, with whom he had a few children, and then to Madame de Montespan, with whom he had 9. Madame de Montespan wouldn't take no for an answer. She was a great beauty with splendid political connections and a tendency to bully. Besides growing somewhat unwieldy as the years rolled on, she liked to put things in his wine to improve his joie de vivre. Once she tried a mixture of bat's blood and honey. It only made him sick. He loved it. Underneath it all, he was basically the wormy type. Marie-Therese died in 1683, just as La Montespan was on her way out. Louis is often accused of treating his wife unkindly, yet he visited her apartment each night, if only to say hello. And once he let her ride in his carriage with two of his mistresses. The year of her death, he'd begun to fear he was a sinner, which is always the beginning of the end in people of romantic temperament. So he realized the time had come to take a drastic step. But instead of shooting himself, he married Madame de Maintenon, a pious widow of 49. They didn't have a good tooth between them. Madame de Maintenon was a glutton for trouble. She had been born in jail, and her first husband had been a humorist. Scarron, the husband, wasn't very funny, but he was funnier than Louis XIV. After that, she'd been governess to Madame de Montespan's 5 surviving illegitimate children. She gradually won the king's attention by double-crossing and ruining her benefactress, and lecturing Louis constantly about his soul, for which because she was extremely religious and thought only of higher things. She thought the Huguenots were a wicked lot, and she induced Louis to revoke the Edict of Nantes, which brought persecution, torture, mass murder, and starvation to much of the kingdom and drove out most of the skilled artisans, laying a firm foundation for the French Revolution. You just couldn't stop her from doing good. Because of her unfortunate past, Louis never openly acknowledged the union with his new bride. What Madame de Maintenon thought about it was beside the point, though it left her neither wife nor queen. Since she was a woman of more than average intelligence with a talent for caustic comment, it seems a shame that her remarks on this particular matter were lost to us. Etiquette to the contrary notwithstanding, I shall always believe she told him a thing or two. She was only human, right? Sadly, they weren't ideally paired to begin with. Madame de Maintenon was usually wrapped up in a series of shawls to help her rheumatism and keep her from catching cold, while Louis was a fresh air fiend, always throwing the windows open and explaining how good it was for you, even when you were freezing. Eventually he got grumpier, his gout got worse, and his teeth hurt, and he had a habit of talking for hours on end about nothing of any consequence. Madame de Maintenon would sit there shivering at her embroidery, wondering ever and anon, I dare say, just why the hell she'd gone through so much trouble to land her dream man. This went on for 30 years, though it seemed longer. It was known as l'Ancien Régime. Louis XIV died in 1715 in the 72nd year of his reign and just a few days shy of his 77th birthday, leaving the world no better than he found it and quite a bit worse in some respects. I cannot truthfully report that he was mourned by a host of friends. He had no friends. He'd never wanted any. The people rejoiced. He'd never liked them either. He was succeeded by his great-grandson, Louis XV, who was no good whatsoever. The life of this monarch shows what can be done by anybody with plenty of time and money and hardly any sense. It would be a pleasure to recall some magnificent deed of his, some worthy thought set down for our guidance. Goodness knows we could use it. But in a period when l'esprit was going great guns, Louis was mum for obvious reasons. He hated l'esprit. Every time he heard one of those gems of classic wit that flashed around the halls of Versailles, he had this horrible sinking feeling there was something nasty behind it. In fact, it's only because of misattribution that Louis managed to horn in on the famous sayings of history, the standards of which, God knows, are not very high. He did not exclaim, "L'état, c'est moi," to the president of the Parliament of Paris in 1655. He never thought of those things until the next day. I'm certain, however, that he said, "Il n'y a plus de Pyrénées," or "There are no more Pyrenees," when he declared the Duc d'Anjou king of Spain in 1700. It sounds just like him. All it did was cause a 13-year-long war, and at the end of it, the Pyrenees were right there where they were before. In fact, they're still there. Thank you.